A forgotten black boy genius, shadowed by mop buckets and silence, uncovers a fatal flaw before a billion-dollar launch, risking everything to save the very company that never saw him. They walked past him every single day. Pressed suits, expensive shoes, eyes too full of themselves to see a small black boy holding a busted tablet beside a mop bucket his mother pushed before sunrise. They called the system flawless, called the launch historic, said it would change the world. Then it collapsed, just like trust does when it's built on who's seen, not who's worthy. And when the power died and their screens turned to silence, the only soul who understood what was happening, they had never spoken to the one they had. This story isn't about machines. It's about blindness. It's about how America forgets that its most brilliant minds come from the shadows, and how one boy, unnoticed, uninvited, stepped forward and rewrote the ending they thought they'd already claimed. They walked past her every morning, pressed suits, designer heels, minds too busy with deadlines to see the woman polishing their legacy. Angela arrived before dawn, mop bucket clinking behind her, shoulders stiff from a night's sleep cut short. No one knew her name, no one asked. She wasn't hired to be remembered. She was hired to be invisible. And she had perfected that role until her son started noticing the patterns others ignored. The building was a marvel of modern engineering. 92 stories of glass and steel rising like a prophecy over Cypress Valley. Doors whispered open with facial recognition. Elevators moved on predictive algorithms, and cameras lined the ceilings like unblinking stars. It was designed to be flawless. At least, that's what the company said. But 12-year-old Sundar knew better. He walked beside his mother through silent corridors, not out of necessity, but habit. There was no one to watch him at home before school, and no city-funded program would accept a quiet black boy with second-hand shoes and a handmade tablet that flickered every few minutes. To most, the building was a fortress of progress. To Sundar, it was a system, one with rhythms and inconsistencies, vulnerabilities no one else seemed to notice. He had mapped its heartbeat like a coder tracks server latency. He knew which elevators stalled half a second between floors 21 and 22. He knew which motion sensors were lagging and which keypads were blinking out of sync. He wasn't guessing. He was studying. Quietly. Like he always had. Angela noticed the way her son watched the lights, how he lingered near power panels like they were puzzles meant only for him. She didn't stop him. She had long stopped asking why his notebooks were filled with looping symbols and circuit sketches. His mind worked in silence, like hers, only faster. She had raised him to survive, but what she didn't expect was that he was learning to rewrite the very world that had erased them both. That morning, the air in the lobby felt charged. Launch day. The building buzzed with a kind of self-importance only tech giants could manufacture. They called it the unveiling of an intelligence backbone that would make human error obsolete. Sundar didn't care about their slogans. He had already seen something odd. A flicker occurred 3 days ago on a server interface that was left unattended for a moment. A flash of raw code where none should be. He logged it, traced it, found it pulsing again 6 seconds later. Again, like a synthetic heartbeat trying to go unnoticed. Angela hadn't slept well. Her son had stayed up late, fingers flying across the cracked screen of his rebuilt tablet, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. She didn't interrupt. She trusted the rhythm of his silence. But in her chest, something stirred. A knowing. A mother's ache. Something was coming. She didn't know what. But it smelled like metal and memory. They reached the janitor's closet. Angela unlocked the door. Sundar stepped inside, his fingers brushing the power conduits hidden behind the wall. Just before the door closed, he whispered to her, "The pattern changed." She froze, looked down at him. He didn't smile. just stared straight ahead like a conductor hearing an offbeat in a symphony no one else knew was playing. Angela nodded once, then pushed the cart forward like always, back into invisibility. But the silence was shifting, and for the first time, the system would feel it too. Angela wheeled her cart down the north corridor of the 47th floor, each step echoing against spotless tiles. The floor was eerily quiet for launch day. No engineers pacing with coffee, no executives barking into Bluetooth headsets, just the humming of servers behind polished glass and the rhythmic clatter of her mop bucket wheels. That silence, Angela didn't trust it. She paused beneath an LED fixture that flickered once, then returned to full glow. Her eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. Not with the lights, not with the air, and certainly not with her son, who had said, the pattern changed that very morning. Sundar wasn't beside her anymore. He'd slipped away during the elevator ride. She'd assumed he was in the closet, fiddling with old wires like he always did. But now her pulse began to rise. She set the mop aside and reached for the walkie, which she wasn't supposed to use unless in an emergency. Her fingers hovered. Who would she call? No one in that building would take her seriously. No one had ever looked at her as anything but background noise. She was the one who emptied their bins and scrubbed their sins off glass walls. But that morning, Angela didn't feel small. She felt summoned. She left the cart behind and moved quickly, her shoulders squared, her boots squeaking slightly on the waxed floors. She remembered how Sundar had stared through the server bay glass just 2 weeks earlier, wide-eyed, as if he wasn't looking at wires but at music. He had said softly, almost reverently, "It's the only place in this building that listens." She hadn't understood at the time. Now, her feet carried her there without question. At the security checkpoint leading into the data core, a young guard stood by the gate, flipping through his phone. He looked up just as Angela reached the scanner. "Ma'am, this area's restricted," he said, eyes flicking to her janitor badge. "You'll need to turn around." She didn't. She locked eyes with him and said, "My son is in there. You either help me or move." Her voice was low, deliberate, but full of something unshakable. He hesitated, unsure if he should laugh or sound the alarm. Then he saw her hands, steady but clenched tight. Her eyes, not scared, but burning. He stepped aside. Angela swiped a borrowed ID from her belt, one she'd found on a break room table last week and forgotten to return. The gate opened. She entered. Inside, the air was cooler, dense with the hum of thousands of machines breathing in perfect sync. And in the far corner, lit only by terminal glow, was Sundar. He stood on a rolling chair, fingers moving faster than the screen could refresh. His face was unreadable, not excited, not scared, just focused. Angela froze. She'd never seen him like this. Fully himself, not hiding, not shrinking, but rising. "Sundar," she whispered. He didn't turn. She walked closer. "Baby, what are you doing?" Only then did he glance back, not sheepish, not nervous, calm. "I'm almost through the shell," he said, like it was nothing. But Angela felt the weight behind those words. Shells, systems, layers. The fortress they'd spent a lifetime being locked out of. He was inside. "Who taught you this?" she asked, softly. He shrugged. "No one. I watched. I listened." He looked back at the code. "It was already broken. I'm just helping it see itself." Angela didn't understand all the lines he was typing, but she understood this. Her son had seen something they had never seen before. He'd read between the pulses of a system too proud to check its pulse. And now, the fate of the building, and maybe more, rested on a boy no one had ever invited to the conversation. Outside the glass bay, red lights began to blink across terminals. Engineers started to gather. Panic was spreading like fire through metal. But inside that room, Angela stepped behind her son, and rested her hand gently on his back. "Then keep going," she whispered. "I'm right here." The room around them dimmed, as if the system itself was bracing for what Sundar was about to uncover. He wasn't typing now. He was guiding, each keystroke deliberate, flowing like a melody he already knew by heart. Angela stood beside him, one hand still resting lightly on his shoulder. She could feel the tension in his muscles, like a violin string that had been tuned just before breaking. Behind the glass, engineers pointed at screens, gesturing wildly. A woman in a blazer screamed into a headset, her face drained of color. Sundar's terminal glowed brighter. A prompt appeared. "Unauthorized protocol detected. Do you wish to proceed?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he whispered. A ripple moved through the system. Monitors flickered. Error messages gave way to live feeds, and suddenly, every executive office on the upper floors filled with mirrored images. Not of code, not of forecasts, but of people. Janitors sweep silently under fluorescent lights. Maintenance workers are fixing broken panels. Angela was scrubbing the CEO's office window at dawn. These weren't security logs. These were the moments no one had ever reviewed, because they didn't matter. But now, they were being broadcast. Sundar had pulled the invisible into full frame. "What did you do?" Angela asked, barely above a breath. He didn't look away from the screen. "I gave them a mirror. It's time they see what they erased." The executives upstairs were in chaos. The launch countdown had frozen at T-27 seconds. The AI core's startup sequence halted. Conference room screens blinked between graphs and shame. No one understood how a breach had reached so deep, bypassing every layer of their firewall, not with brute force, but with familiarity. The system wasn't being attacked. It was being reminded. Angela watched the footage looping overhead. Herself, hunched in a hallway, wiping handprints off glass. Her face looked tired, older. She'd never seen herself from this angle before, not like this. She reached out and lightly touched the screen. "They recorded everything," she said. "Always have," Sundar answered. "They just never looked." On the 89th floor, the CTO pounded on a console. "Shut it down! Cut power!" A technician hesitated. "Sir, if we kill it mid-sequence, we risk corrupting the entire AI core." "Then wipe it!" he barked. "I want that terminal burned from memory." But another voice broke through the shouting. "Wait," said the CEO, stepping forward. He stared at the screen showing Angela's face, pausing the feed with a trembling finger. "Who is that?" "Her badge says Angela, janitorial," someone muttered. "She's been here over a decade." The CEO didn't respond. His jaw tightened. In that still frame, something flickered behind his eyes. A crack, a memory, a shift. Back in the server room, the system blinked again. A new message appeared across Sundar's terminal. "Someone is watching you." He didn't flinch. "Good," he said. Then he turned to Angela. "I think they're tracing me now. The source, the ghost code, it's moving." Angela frowned. "What ghost code?" Sundar tapped a sequence of commands. Lines scrolled down the screen like rain, fragments of an older system, buried beneath years of patches and updates, pulsing with signatures that didn't belong to the company. "It was written by someone else," he said. "A long time ago, like me, but before. They left a back door. I think they wanted someone to find it." Angela's heart clenched. "You're not the first," she murmured. "But you might be the first they can't ignore." A final line of text blinked onto the screen. "You're not supposed to be here." Angela stared at it, then looked at her son. "Neither were you," she whispered. "But look what happens when you don't leave." He smiled. Not big, not bold, just enough to steady the storm. In the executive boardroom, a silence thicker than concrete settled. No one moved. On every wall-sized screen, footage continued to roll, silent portraits of workers whose names they would never know. A cafeteria worker is rinsing out coffee pots. A mechanic is replacing a belt at 3:47 a.m. An older woman is folding paper towels with arthritic fingers. And there, again, was Angela. Alone, mopping the marble floors with the reverence of someone who knew she would never be thanked for it. The CEO's voice broke the silence. "We never saw them," he whispered. His chief strategy officer turned. "Sir, are you saying this is our fault?" "I'm saying it's our blindness," he replied. The system wasn't crashing. It was reflecting, like a machine designed to mimic human judgment, had finally turned the lens inward. And the one who unlocked it wasn't a programmer or a founder or a cybersecurity firm on retainer. It was a boy whose name wasn't on any access list, a boy who'd learned the system by proximity, not privilege. Back in the server room, Sundar stepped down from the chair. He typed one final line into the terminal. "You're not the only one who sees in silence." Immediately, a blinking prompt returned. "Then you know why I stayed hidden." Angela leaned over his shoulder. The terminal displayed lines of code unlike anything she'd seen. But the rhythm, she recognized it. Not with her eyes, with her gut. "This isn't just code," she said. "It's like it's humming." Sundar nodded. "It's like mine." Another message blinked in. "They erased me. I built their backbone, and they locked me out. I made them giants. Then I disappeared." Angela whispered, "This is the ghost, isn't it?" Sundar nodded. "Her signature's everywhere, but always just under the surface." The following message came faster. "I gave them strength, but not soul. You gave them memory. You finished what I started." Sundar typed slowly. "Come out. Help us rebuild. Together." Silence. Then, "You trust too easily." And then, "But maybe that's what saves us." The server room lights flickered, then steadied. Across the building, screens returned to neutral. But one final message appeared on every device, from the CEO's polished tablet to the janitor closet's control panel. The invisible made you visible. Sundar exhaled. His hands shook for the first time. Angela wrapped both arms around his narrow frame and held him. "They saw you," she said, her voice raw with truth. "And they'll never forget." Security rushed in, but stopped short at the door, seeing a mother holding her son and a system that had already surrendered to a new kind of intelligence, one born not of machine learning, but human seeing. Angela stepped back. "He didn't break anything," she told them firmly. "He fixed what none of you even looked at." Outside, the boardroom slowly came alive. Executives murmured. A few sat back, stunned. Others wiped sweat from their temples. The CEO stood still, staring at his reflection in the now blank screen. He'd built a fortress of logic, yet it had taken a child, and his mother, to remind him that logic without memory is nothing but vanity. Back downstairs, Sundar closed his tablet. The last prompt on his screen read, "Are you still listening?" He didn't type a reply. He just looked up and nodded. The CEO turned slowly toward the window, watching the city come to life beneath the early morning sky. "We built towers," he murmured, "and never looked down." No one responded, not because they disagreed, but because none of them knew how to come back from what had just been revealed. Angela and Sundar were still in the server room, but their presence now rippled through every department like an overdue reckoning. People began speaking in hushed tones. Some wiped their eyes. A few made calls they had avoided for years. Security's chief looked to the CEO. "What should we tell the press?" "The truth," the CEO answered. "And make damn sure their names are at the top." Downstairs, Angela guided Sundar back to the janitor's closet. She didn't say much, just held his hand tightly. He had changed something massive today, but to her, he was still just her son, the quiet boy with a busted tablet and a storm in his head. "You did well," she said softly. "No," Sundar replied. "We did." And with that, they walked forward, not unseen anymore, but unforgettable. The following morning, the building's lobby felt different. People walked more slowly, their heads slightly bowed. Screens once filled with vanity metrics now ran a quiet message across the bottom in gray letters on white. The invisible made you visible. Angela entered not as a ghost, but as a witness. No one blocked her. No one looked through her. Some even nodded as she passed, unsure how to greet a woman they had ignored for a decade. Sundar walked beside her, shoulders square, eyes forward. He clutched his tablet tightly, but not out of fear, out of readiness. The board had called an emergency all-staff meeting. Transparent, they said. A new beginning. The CEO stood at the front of the marble atrium, not behind a podium, but beside it. He didn't wear a tie. His voice was lower than usual, unpolished, unguarded. "Some of you are angry," he said. "Some of you are scared. I am both. But above all, I am awake now, and it took a 12-year-old and his mother to show me what blindness looks like." A murmur moved through the crowd. No sarcasm, no eye-rolling, just the hum of a collective reckoning. He gestured toward Angela and Sundar. "They didn't break into our system. We locked them out of our sight. They saw what we didn't. They heard what we ignored. And when everything we trusted fell apart, they held the pieces together with nothing but instinct and love. So today, we start again. And we don't start with code. We start with people." A burst of applause rose. Not polite, not rehearsed. Raw, relieved, real. After the meeting, department heads lined up to speak with Angela. Some fumbled over apologies. Others asked for her insight. She didn't say much. She wasn't there for validation. She was there because Sundar wanted her to be. Upstairs, in the newly cleared workspace near the server floor, a long table waited. No nameplate, no label, just tools, wires, broken devices, and one chair smaller than the rest. Sundar sat down and unpacked his tablet. He began sketching a new diagram across the table's surface with dry erase markers. Nobody interrupted. The CTO entered cautiously. "We'd like your help, Sundar. Not just today. We want to build something with you. But on your terms. What do you need?" Sundar didn't look up. "I need time. And no one is watching over my shoulder." The CTO hesitated. "Okay, but may I ask what you're building?" Sundar finally looked up. "A system that remembers the people who built it, not just the code." The CTO swallowed hard. "That's not in any manual." "That's the point," Sundar replied. Angela stood by the door, watching her son, who had once been invisible, now setting the tone for a company that had once worshipped data, but had forgotten its human side. Her hands still smelled faintly of bleach. Her shoulders ached. Her shoes were the same ones she wore last year. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer just surviving. She was raising someone who was rewriting what survival even meant. And people were listening. Later that afternoon, as Sundar continued to work, someone knocked on the frame of the open door. It was a woman, older, with sharp eyes and calloused hands. "I'm from facilities," she said. "I used to mop the 33rd floor, long before they automated it." Angela stepped forward. "I remember you. Miriam, right?" The woman smiled. "I never forgot your kindness. You once left me a hot cup of tea on a rainy morning. I just came to say, I saw the footage. You and your boy. You gave me something I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime." Angela nodded, eyes full. "Thank you for remembering. It matters." When Miriam left, Sundar looked up. Can we bring her back? Angela looked puzzled. What do you mean? Not just her, Sundar clarified. All of them. The ones who vanished when the company called it progress. If we're rebuilding, we need everyone. Angela exhaled. That's a lot of convincing. Sundar smiled. I'm good at patterns. I'll figure it out. Outside, the city carried on. Honking horns, late trains, endless news feeds. But inside that glass tower, something rare had taken root. The future was no longer being dictated. It was being shared. Carefully. Thoughtfully. One voice at a time. 3 days later, the old break room on the 8th floor, once a forgotten corner between server banks and storage closets, had been transformed. Gone were the flickering vending machines and stained coffee counters. In their place stood long tables littered with circuit boards, soldering pens, open notebooks, and half-dismantled devices that no longer qualified as trash. They called it the lab, but not officially. There were no door signs, no names etched on glass, just open space and the quiet hum of rebuilding, where Sundar sat cross-legged on the floor beside a retired robotics engineer and a former janitor named Jorge, who happened to know more about HVAC telemetry than the original designers. No one asked for resumes. Ideas were the only credentials. Angela came every day, but she no longer cleaned. Richard Langston, the CEO, had insisted on promoting her to facilities coordinator with a decent salary, health benefits, and a sunlit office. She took the job, but only under one condition. She could still wear her old shoes. They remind me of what I've walked through, she told him. He didn't argue. He just nodded, like someone still learning how to listen. In truth, Richard hadn't slept well in days, not because of the board inquiries or press appearances, but because of one line that wouldn't leave his mind. The ones you never see are the ones who understand everything. It haunted him, not as an accusation, but as a roadmap. The future he once thought was built on brilliance alone now seemed incomplete without humility. And humility, he was learning, often wore the quietest clothes. In the lab, Sundar had begun constructing what he called a listening net, an open-source system of local mesh nodes designed not just to gather data, but to transmit context, intention, and human nuance. The problem with old networks, he explained to the team, isn't bandwidth, it's blindness. They hear everything, but listen to nothing. His diagrams were complex, yet intuitive, part engineering, part empathy. Jorge helped build the casing for the prototype using discarded materials from the loading dock. Miriam returned with ideas about acoustic sensors she'd once seen in a decommissioned security wing. The project had no project manager, just momentum. Meanwhile, journalists circled. The footage from the server room had gone viral, not leaked, but quietly released by the company with Sundar's consent. Talk shows debated whether he was a genius or a symbol of genius. Cable news anchors used phrases like inspiration and reckoning, but Sundar ignored it all. He muted the buzz, turned down interviews, and refused the spotlight, not out of fear, but clarity. I don't want them to remember a miracle, he told Angela one night. I want them to remember what they missed. Angela kissed his forehead. Then build something they can't ignore. On the 4th day, the prototype of the listening net flickered to life. Small, silent, no bigger than a shoebox. But when Sundar activated it, a wave of signals pulsed across the old building infrastructure. In the control room, engineers stared as legacy systems responded with uncharacteristic accuracy, interpreting vague commands with context, detecting emotional tone in spoken requests, and redirecting power flow in real time based on predicted human need. It's like it's aware, one tech whispered. Sundar didn't smile. He just kept writing code. That night, Richard sat alone in his office, reviewing the logs. He watched the way Sundar's system adapted, not like a machine getting smarter, but like a person learning how to care. and he remembered something from long ago. A little girl named Cricket, rebuilding radios at a dusty orphanage. Forgotten, brilliant, lost. He pulled out an old leather notebook from a drawer, his childhood journal, and flipped through pages of circuits and song lyrics and sketches of the girl he never said goodbye to. For the first time in decades, he cried. Meanwhile, down in the lab, Angela adjusted the wiring on a faulty node. Miriam brewed tea. Jorge laughed at one of Sundar's dry observations. The future wasn't waiting anymore. It had begun, in silence, in scraps, in the hands of those once discarded. It hummed not with pride, but purpose, and somewhere beyond firewalls and press releases, a faint signal blinked in response. Cricket had seen the pulse, and she was listening. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of the repurposed lab, casting long golden streaks across tabletops scattered with wires, sticky notes, and soldered dreams. Sundar was already at his post, hands curled around a steaming mug of peppermint tea Angela had made. The listening net's prototype pulsed with a dim light on the floor beside him, quietly running its first long-range diagnostics. Data streamed gently like breath, visible only through the flicker of code reflected in Sundar's glasses. Across the room, Angela and Mariam sorted through discarded components. There was no spoken plan, only rhythm. The lab had begun moving like a body, instinctively, collectively, never rushed but always alive. Richard Langston appeared in the doorway, not with an entourage or clipboard, but a single worn folder tucked beneath his arm. He waited until Angela looked up, then gave a short nod. "May I?" She nodded once, tight-lipped, but polite. Sundar didn't look up. Richard crossed the room, crouched beside him like someone afraid of breaking the spell. "I need your help," he said, voice low. "There's someone I need to find." That made Sundar pause. He turned slowly. "The woman in your notebook." Richard blinked. "You saw it?" "You left it open in your office." The page was humming. Richard's lips curled faintly. She called herself Cricket. She vanished before the world could see her. But now, I think she's watching. Sundar nodded. "She pinged our system 3 hours ago, bounced through a ghost node east of Red Hollow." Richard's hands clenched slightly. "That's where we grew up." Angela stepped closer. "You think she's still there?" "Not physically," Sundar said, "but she left a trail." Later that afternoon, they gathered around the projection wall in the lab. Sundar loaded a signal map, thin blue lines darting like nervous handwriting across a satellite schematic. Each hop, each bounce, each encoded whisper was traced with such delicate intention that it almost felt like poetry. Angela leaned in, reading between the lines. "She's not hiding," she said. "She's sending breadcrumbs." "To test us," Sundar added. "To see who's listening the right way." Richard stared at the screen. The map ended just outside a rundown satellite station long since marked abandoned. "That's where we built our first antenna," he whispered. "She used to say machines talk louder in quiet places." "She's waiting for you to speak back," Miriam said. "But not as a CEO." Angela added softly, "As a boy who left and forgot to look back." The room fell silent. Not with discomfort, but gravity. Sundar typed something quickly, a compressed data burst, encrypted not for secrecy, but sentiment. A signal embedded with sound recordings of Angela singing lullabies, of quiet hallway echoes, of Sundar's laughter, static filtered but warm. "Let's see if she remembers the frequency of home," he said. Then he pressed send. Outside, the wind curled between steel and glass, but in the lab, the air felt still. Sundar's screen pulsed once, then again. A return ping. A simple line of code scrolled across the display. Not a command, Not a threat. Just 4 words. I hear you now. The reply lingered on the screen like breath on cold glass. Simple, fragile, but unmistakable. I hear you now. Sundar read the words twice, his heartbeat sinking to their weight. Around him, no one spoke. It was as if the lab itself had inhaled. Richard moved closer, eyes fixed on the line of code. That's her, he whispered, not as a CEO, but as a man seeing a ghost step into daylight. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let's answer her properly. Sundar nodded, fingers already dancing across the keys. He began composing not just a response, but an invitation, a pathway that could lead her in without triggering alerts or defenses. She's smart, he muttered. Paranoid, careful. We'll build a bridge with shadows and truth. Miriam leaned over. How long will it take? Not long, he replied, but it has to feel like forgiveness, not tracking. Richard pulled up a chair beside him and opened the worn folder he'd brought earlier. Inside were blueprints, schematics, and old radio designs hand-drawn by children in an orphanage 2 decades ago. This is where she started, he said, voice unsteady. Maybe if she sees we remember, she'll believe we still care. Angela took the designs and pinned them along the whiteboard wall. They weren't clean or professional, but they had soul. Little notes in the margins, misspelled words, doodles of trees and stars. It was a childhood encoded in solder and silence. Sundar scanned them carefully, matching frequency notes to recent pings. She's still using the same signature, he murmured. Same spacing, same intervals. Her code hums. Richard smiled faintly. She used to do that. Hum when she worked. That's why we called her Cricket. Sundar glanced over. You didn't forget her. You just didn't know how to carry the memory. Richard swallowed hard. I'm learning now. They worked through the afternoon, crafting a virtual shell that resembled the original radio station they had built together as children. Not a trap. A memory. A home rebuilt in digital stone. The bridge Sundar designed wasn't just functional. It was intimate. Every pixel, every script was layered with acknowledgement. By dusk, the bridge was complete. They launched it at 7:03 p.m., just as the city outside turned golden and the lab's shadows stretched long across the floor. Sundar uploaded the construct with steady hands. The system pulsed once, then waited. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft chime echoed from the server's speakers. A new file appeared. No name, no format. Just size. 1.1 MB. Angela opened it carefully. Inside were audio clips, broken loops, humming layered with old radio static. And then, a voice. Soft, female, older than they remembered, but unmistakably her. I got your message, it said. Didn't think anyone still knew the song. Richard closed his eyes. We never stopped hearing it, he whispered. Miriam covered her mouth. Sundar sat back. She's testing us. No, Angela corrected gently. She's trusting us. As the last note of her humming faded from the file, another message appeared, this time in text. Not ready to come home, but I see you, and I'm listening. The words weren't a resolution. They were a promise. Somewhere in the digital wild, a forgotten girl had heard the signal, and for the first time in years, she answered with more than silence. The lab exhaled. A bridge had been built. Now they waited for footsteps on the other side. The reply lingered on the screen like breath on cold glass, simple, fragile, but unmistakable. I hear you now. Sundar read the words twice, his heartbeat sinking to their weight. Around him, no one spoke. It was as if the lab itself had inhaled. Richard moved closer, eyes fixed on the line of code. That's her, he whispered, not as a CEO, but as a man seeing a ghost step into daylight. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let's answer her properly. Sundar nodded, fingers already dancing across the keys. He began composing not just a response, but an invitation, a pathway that could lead her in without triggering alerts or defenses. She's smart, he muttered. Paranoid, careful. We'll build a bridge with shadows and truth. Mariam leaned over. How long will it take? Not long, he replied. But it has to feel like forgiveness, not tracking. Richard pulled up a chair beside him and opened the worn folder he'd brought earlier. Inside were blueprints, schematics, and old radio designs hand-drawn by children in an orphanage 2 decades ago. This is where she started, he said, voice unsteady. Maybe if she sees we remember, she'll believe we still care. Angela took the designs and pinned them along the whiteboard wall. They weren't clean or professional, but they had soul. Little notes in the margins, misspelled words, doodles of trees and stars. It was a childhood encoded in solder and silence. Sundar scanned them carefully, matching frequency notes to recent pings. She's still using the same signature, he murmured. Same spacing, same intervals. Her code hums. Richard smiled faintly. She used to do that, hum when she worked. That's why we called her Cricket. Sundar glanced over. You didn't forget her. You just didn't know how to carry the memory. Richard swallowed hard. I'm learning now. They worked through the afternoon, crafting a virtual shell that resembled the original radio station they had built together as children. Not a trap, a memory. A home rebuilt in digital stone. The bridge Sundar designed wasn't just functional, it was intimate. Every pixel, every script was layered with acknowledgement. By dusk, the bridge was complete. They launched it at 7:03 p.m., just as the city outside turned golden and the lab's shadows stretched long across the floor. Sundar uploaded the construct with steady hands. The system pulsed once, then waited. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft chime echoed from the server's speakers. A new file appeared. No name, no format, just size, 1.1 MB. Angela opened it carefully. Inside were audio clips, broken loops, humming layered with old radio static, and then a voice. Soft, female, older than they remembered, but unmistakably her. I got your message, it said. Didn't think anyone still knew the song. Richard closed his eyes. We never stopped hearing it, he whispered. Mariam covered her mouth. Sundar sat back. She's testing us. No, Angela corrected gently. She's trusting us. As the last note of her humming faded from the file, another message appeared. This time in the text. Not ready to come home, but I see you, and I'm listening. The words weren't a resolution. They were a promise. Somewhere in the digital wild, a forgotten girl had heard the signal, and for the first time in years, she answered with more than silence. The lab exhaled. A bridge had been built. Now they waited for footsteps on the other side. The next morning, the lab felt different. Not louder, just more awake. As if the walls had overheard the night's exchange and decided to remember. Angela moved through the space with calm efficiency, checking cables and booting up devices, humming softly, almost unconsciously. Sundar was already plugged in, tracing the metadata embedded in Cricket's voice file. She left more than a message, he murmured. This isn't just a recording. There's a thread. A thread? Richard asked. Sundar nodded. Encrypted within her vocal range. Buried deep. It's a pattern of harmonics, layered like a second message hidden inside the tone. He paused, adjusted his headphones. It's not code. It's music. She's speaking in sound. Angela exchanged a glance with Mariam. Do you think she wants us to decode it? No, Sundar said. I think she wants us to feel it first. He isolated the harmonic sequence and ran it through a sound mapping interface. What emerged on the screen wasn't text. It was a waveform that pulsed in 4-beat intervals. Angela stepped closer. Like a heartbeat. Richard blinked. She always counted in 4s. Everything. Radio intervals, encryption cycles, even foot taps. It was her rhythm. Sundar stared at the screen. This isn't a warning. It's an echo. She's leaving pieces of herself behind. Not to be found, but to be known. Outside, the sky darkened suddenly. A storm rolled in, unseasonal, sharp. The building creaked slightly as the pressure shifted. Then the alert came. One of the eastern field nodes, which had been dormant for a long time, pinged as active. Sundar spun in his chair. It's her. She activated an old broadcast relay. Off-grid, rural, but functional. Location? Mariam asked. Sundar zoomed in on the map. North Texas, 5 miles from the Red Hollow Orphanage. Richard's breath caught. She's leading us back. Angela didn't hesitate. Then we follow. Within an hour, they were in motion. Angela drove, steady, focused, while Richard navigated with a battered paper map. Mariam monitored signal strength from the back seat, laptop balanced on her knees. Sundar sat silently beside her, staring out the window, hands clenched tight in his hoodie pocket. The city gave way to flat land, power lines stretching like skeletal fingers across storm-colored skies. Rain threatened, but didn't fall. The silence between them wasn't tension. It was anticipation. As they neared the site, Sundar whispered, "She's close." They reached the edge of a fenced clearing where a rusted satellite dish leaned like a forgotten sentinel. The relay station crouched beside it, half swallowed by weeds and time. Angela stepped out first, boots crunching gravel. She walked to the station door and paused. "She left it unlocked," she said. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something warmer, like burnt ozone. Screens flickered dimly. Power still ran, barely. Sundar found the console and plugged in his tablet. It synced instantly. A file appeared, titled only, "For Those Who Still Hear." Angela opened it. A text log scrolled upward, entries from cricket. Thoughts, fragments, memories, some angry, some achingly tender. "They said I was dangerous," one read, "but I was just tired of being erased." Another, "If they never see you, build your mirror." Then, "He left. I don't blame him, but I never stopped building." Richard stepped away, swallowing hard. "She never gave up," he said. "She just got tired of waiting for permission." Sundar copied the log. "She's not asking for rescue. She's asking for recognition." The storm finally broke, rain tapping gently against the roof. In that quiet percussion, Angela whispered, "We see you now." The console blinked one final time. A prompt. "What will you build next?" Mariam looked at Sundar. He stared at the words like they were the beginning of a sentence he'd waited years to finish. "Something she'd be proud of," he said. And outside, thunder rolled, not as a threat, but as applause. They returned to the city under silver skies, the road behind them soaked in quiet revelations. Sundar hadn't spoken for miles, but his fingers danced restlessly across his tablet, replaying the waveform from Cricket's last message, like it carried answers not yet ready to surface. Angela watched him through the rearview mirror, not with worry, but reverence. She saw something in him now the world had begun to recognize. Not just brilliance, but stewardship. The kind of mind that didn't just understand the future, but wanted to shape it gently. Back at the lab, the team worked through the night. They weren't chasing a ghost anymore. They were laying the foundation for a bridge long overdue. They called it Project Quietar, an open-source mesh of resilient code and soft data, built not to dominate, but to listen, to protect the unnoticed, to empower those dismissed. Sundar led the architecture. Angela managed the integration with schools, community centers, and shelters. Mariam and Richard revised the policies surrounding it. Every line of code reflected someone they had once ignored. On launch day, no confetti fell. No stage was built, just a broadcast. One signal sent out to every forgotten corner, inviting feedback, inviting participation. Quietar isn't finished, Sundar said in the live stream, sitting beside his mother, hoodie still too big, eyes unwavering. It grows every time someone who's been silenced chooses to speak. The feed cut to a single sentence written in chalk on the lab's wall that morning by Angela. We see you. We hear you. Now show us what you've built. Across the country, something rippled. Teachers in underfunded schools downloaded the node. Homeless shelters synced to it. A retired coder in Detroit who thought no one would ever use his work again emailed a pull request. A girl in Appalachia, coding on borrowed Wi-Fi, patched a security hole no one else had noticed. They weren't just users. They were co-creators. And Cricket? She hadn't returned. Not fully. But messages came. Glitches of gratitude, tweaks to logic, strange poetic comments buried in bug reports, like digital fingerprints that only those who listened closely would recognize. One message read, I'm not gone, just further away than fear usually lets people reach. Angela smiled when she read it. Sundar archived it with care. And Richard? He stepped back, quietly, purposefully. He declined a speaking tour and turned down a documentary. This isn't my story anymore, he told a journalist. It never was. I just missed it the first time. Instead, he became the first funder of the Quietar Foundation, redirecting 12% of the company's AI revenue to scholarships and tech mentorships for kids whose names had never shown up on gifted lists. Kids like Sundar, like Cricket, like the thousands still waiting to be seen. One evening, months later, Angela returned home with Sundar after a long day at the lab. She warmed soup while he soldered a tiny board he had been designing all week. What's this one do? She asked. He shrugged. It listens better than the last one. She smiled. You're building something quiet again? He looked up. Quiet doesn't mean small, Mama. Quiet means powerful when it finally speaks. Outside their window, the street buzzed with everyday life. Buses wheezing, lights flickering, people passing by. But inside that small kitchen, something larger was taking root. A new system, still invisible to most, but not for long. By the end of autumn, Quietar had reached over 43 cities, but not in headlines or tech expos, in food pantries, school basements, back rooms of public libraries, places where no one expected innovation, places where innovation had always lived but never been named. In the town of Gulf Heights, Louisiana, a single mother named Lenora rigged a Quietar node using her son's broken Chromebook. Just wanted to make sure the hurricane alerts got to everyone, she said when asked. In Boise, a former foster youth created a Q&A-based translation patch for kids who spoke no English. No one helped me, he wrote in the commit message, so I'm helping the next me. The code kept growing, unpolished, sometimes imperfect, but unmistakably alive. It wasn't beautiful. It was functional. And it wasn't elite. It was human. Angela began receiving letters, not emails, handwritten notes, one from a janitor in Baltimore. I used to think being invisible was normal. Then I saw you. Another from a teenage girl in Arizona. I didn't know I could build anything until I saw your son. The lab started pinning the letters to the wall, not as decoration, but as documentation. Proof that systems weren't only built in silence. They were repaired by those who'd endured it. Sundar rarely read them aloud, but he always read them. Every word, every scrawl of uneven handwriting. Sometimes he copied phrases into his notebook, sketching circuit diagrams beside them. Angela once peeked over his shoulder and saw the words, "We belong in the room before it breaks." Meanwhile, outside that room, the world argued. Some said Quietar was too open, too raw. It made the wrong people too powerful. A pundit on national television called it an empathy experiment gone rogue. "We can't verify contributors," he snapped. "How do we know these builders aren't threats?" Miriam responded the next day in a quiet blog post. "You've spent decades building systems that only trust people who look like you," she wrote. Quietar asks a different question. What if trust is something earned by listening instead of inherited by design? The post went viral in small circles, the kind of places that didn't trend but did transform. At home, Sundar began building a new prototype. It wasn't about defense. It wasn't even about data. "It's a bridge," he told Angela one night, "between voices too quiet to hear and systems too loud to notice." Angela nodded slowly. "And what's on the other side of the bridge?" Sundar thought for a moment. "Belonging," he said, "for people who never thought they deserved it." She kissed his forehead, her fingers lingering just a second longer than usual. Outside, winter crept in early. The streets shimmered with frost, and the city's pulse slowed under the weight of a new season. But in the lab, the hum never stopped. Not mechanical, human. The murmur of people who had always worked in the margins, now building the mainframe. And on one corner of the chalkboard, Sundar wrote something that stayed for weeks without anyone daring to erase it. "Power isn't who gets to speak. It's who decides who gets heard." It started not with headlines, but with a quiet forum post from a small, underfunded library in Selma, Alabama. "We can't afford new routers," the librarian typed. "Can Quietar still work with what we have?" No one expected a response, but within hours, 3 volunteers, one in Oakland, another in El Paso, and a third from a village near Nairobi, shared a patch, a workaround, a schematic. And by sunrise the next morning, the library was online. No PR campaign followed. No sponsors. Just one follow-up post. "It works, and the kids stayed longer today." That was how Quietar moved, beneath the noise, like water under stone. Angela began her quiet campaign across the city. Each Friday she took a different bus line home, choosing random stops: barbershops, dollar stores, taquerias, laundromats. She'd leave behind printed guides on how to connect to Quietar using only a phone and a discarded USB key. She spoke softly, if at all. Sometimes she would simply nod to the store clerk, hand over the envelope, and walk out. She didn't need gratitude. She only needed the knowledge that someone else would be connected when the lights went out. Meanwhile, back at the lab, the chalkboard filled up again, not with math, but with memory. Notes, messages, hand-sketched diagrams on receipts, fragments of letters. In one corner, Miriam taped a napkin covered in clumsy block letters. "My brother used Quietar to tell Mom we're safe." Beneath it, Angela scribbled with a fading marker. "That's what systems should be for." But not everyone agreed. A major tech firm launched its rival product, TrustLink. Sleek, encrypted, subscription-based. Their slogan? Connection with confidence. But their code deleted inactive users every 60 days. It locked out IDs it couldn't verify. It rewrote history for convenience. Sundar read their white paper twice and said softly, "It's made to forget people." That sentence stuck like a thorn. In response, the Quietar devs issued a new release. Built to remember. It included a new protocol, Echo, a function that archived every contributor's handle in encrypted memory. No names flashed publicly, no credit lists. But the network knew who helped build it. They weren't authors, they were ancestors. For the first time, someone asked to interview Angela. Not the CTO, not Sundar, her. The reporter was young, wore mismatched earrings, and had a scar behind one ear like a story she hadn't yet told. She brought no camera crew, just a notepad. "How did it start?" she asked. Angela sipped her coffee and looked out the cafe window, where buses rumbled and pigeons scattered like memory fragments. "It started with silence," she said, "and a boy who listened to it." She didn't offer quotes. She told stories of calloused hands and cold floors, of mop buckets and servers humming with secrets. The reporter wrote in long, unhurried strokes, like someone carving something permanent. The article didn't gain national attention, no trend. But 2 weeks later, janitors in over 100 buildings quietly posted laminated copies, some with highlighters, some with tape, some with coffee stains and thumbtacks. That meant more. One night, Sundar came home late from the lab and found Angela asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on a printout filled with circuit sketches. He didn't wake her. He just sat beside her, picked up the pencil she had dropped, and began to trace her unfinished lines, continuing from where she left off. That was coincidental now, not a disruption, not a revolution, but a relay. And the baton was still moving, hand to hand, heart to heart, through the silence. It wasn't a summit, at least not officially. No podiums, no badges, no grand introductions. Just a room tucked beneath a public library near Pittsburgh, with creaky chairs, a whiteboard too faded to erase, and a pot of weak coffee. But around the table sat 35 people from 12 cities, engineers, teachers, mechanics, elders, teenagers, and 3 former inmates. They had all touched coincidental in some way, and now they were here to ask, what happens next? Angela didn't sit at the head of the table, but people looked to her like she did. When she spoke, it was slow, deliberate, never rehearsed. "The system grew because no one told it what it couldn't do," she said. "But now, they're noticing. The companies, the ones with funding. They're coming for the frequencies, the infrastructure, the narrative." A man in a wheelchair with an ex-con badge still clipped to his jacket added, "We built this so no one would be left behind, but they're about to sell our lifeline." A debate broke out about licensing, trademarks, encryption keys, whether to go public or stay underground. Some feared losing momentum. Others feared becoming just another commodity. In the corner, Sundar listened without interrupting, his tablet glowing faintly. He was older now, 15, taller, still quiet, but his silence carried weight. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "They want to make it shiny," he said, "but if we make it beautiful instead, they can't sell that." The room fell still. Someone scribbled his words on the edge of the whiteboard. "Make it beautiful." That became the anchor. For the next 2 hours, they mapped out what that could mean. Not just code, but care. Not just features, but values. Trust that doesn't require a password. Nodes that light up only when someone nearby needs them. Stories woven into updates. Angela suggested adding a gratitude log, an optional space where users could write why they needed the connection, or who helped them find it. It wouldn't be stored forever, just long enough for someone else to read it and remember why they kept going. A teacher from Atlanta asked if that was safe. "No," Angela said, "but it's true." They voted, not on policies, but on principles. No one gets erased. No story gets stolen. No connection is wasted. It wasn't perfect. People argued. A teenager stormed out at one point. The coffee ran out before noon. But by the end of the day, they didn't have a press release. They had a direction. Sundar walked beside Angela as they left the building. The sky was streaked with the kind of gold that only shows up after a hard rain. "Did it work?" he asked. Angela didn't answer immediately. She just kept walking, her steps steady, her back straight. "We won't know," she said finally. Not until someone years from now finds a signal they didn't expect and says thank you. Sundar nodded. In his hoodie pocket, he carried a tiny chip, no larger than a fingernail, wrapped in paper like a secret passed during lunch. Inside, it was the next update, one that wouldn't change the system, but reveal what had always been there, a quiet, persistent belief that no one should be invisible. The article dropped quietly at 2:13 a.m. on a Thursday. No announcement, no trailer, just a link buried inside an academic newsletter from a cybersecurity professor at Cornell. The title, The Unlicensed Future. In it, Quietar was dissected line by line, not as a threat, but as a revelation. The professor called it the most humane protocol architecture of the last 20 years. He praised its resilience, its adaptability, and, most controversially, its refusal to monetize. That word, refusal, echoed through boardrooms like a slur. Within 48 hours, Angela's email was flooded. Some were curious. Others were condescending. A few were aggressive. Offers came in, funding, acquisition, partnerships, all dressed in polite vocabulary, but beneath the politeness, one message kept repeating, "Let us take it from here." Angela didn't respond. She read each message, printed some, and shredded others. But she never replied. Instead, she called Sundar, Mariam, and the others back into the lab. They met on a Sunday, doors locked, blinds drawn. The lab smelled like solder and coffee. "They want to scale us," Angela said, "which means flatten us until we fit their boxes." "They'll outspend us," Mariam said quietly. "Out-hire us, out-market us." Sundar was sitting by the window. Knees were drawn up, eyes scanning a page of user messages they had archived. "We won't beat them," he said. "But we don't have to play their game." "Then what do we do?" asked Jorge, a builder from New Mexico who had just driven 22 hours to join the meeting. "We do what they can't," Angela replied. "We stay personal." They worked all night. What they built wasn't bigger. It was closer. A feature called Root Mode allows any local Quietar node to host its archive independently, untraceably, and unowned. They introduced story seeds, allowing people to embed voice recordings, memories, messages inside network handshakes, whispers that could travel through signals without names attached. It was messy. It was poetic. And it was entirely outside the grasp of corporate structure. The pushback was immediate. The following week, 3 major internet service providers blocked Quietar packets in 7 metro areas. News outlets began questioning its security. Anonymous tipsters floated rumors of misuse. A respected tech journalist referred to it as the ghost net for radicals. Angela didn't blink. Neither did the team. They knew this wasn't about reputation. It was about continuity. In Kansas City, a retired technician replicated a blocked node using only a walkie-talkie relay and an old ham radio tower. In the Bronx, a teenager routed traffic through an underground mesh of Wi-Fi repeaters hidden in laundromats. In Oakland, someone printed the entire Quietar protocol on a series of public posters titled, "In Case You Ever Need to Remember." One night, Sundar looked at Angela as they cleaned up after a 12-hour shift. "They're coming harder now," he said. "And faster." Angela nodded. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but her eyes were calm. "Because we're working," she said. "You only attack what threatens your comfort." He didn't smile, just leaned his head gently against her shoulder for a moment. That night, in a basement server room lit only by backup power, the system whispered its quiet promise. "You cannot stop what you cannot see, and you'll never see what listens more than it speaks." It happened during a storm, one of those summer downpours that come without warning, flood the gutters, and silence the city beneath a curtain of rain. The lab had lost power for the 3rd time that week. Angela sat near the emergency lantern, her eyes closed, just listening to the hum of backup systems. Sundar paced near the far wall, counting pings from each node manually, tracking signal strength through a backup terminal he'd soldered together from parts meant for the recycling bin. "We lost Cincinnati," he said. "Not just blocked, rewritten. Someone pushed a false fork. Same name, same protocol, but scrubbed clean." Mariam turned from the server stack. "They're copying us?" "No," Sundar said. "They're hollowing us out." Angela stood. She didn't need to understand every line of code, but she knew what this was. Not just censorship. It was erasure. A slow, surgical attempt to turn Quietar into something the original builders wouldn't recognize. And it was working. New users were being onboarded through fake nodes, with data being logged, tagged, and sold. The system's voice was changing. "So, we speak louder," said Jorge. "We tell them." Sundar shook his head. "They don't know they're joining the wrong thing. It looks identical. That's the point." Silence hung heavy in the room. Outside, thunder cracked like a warning. "Then we give the real version something they can't fake," Angela said slowly. "Something only truth can carry." The idea wasn't elegant. It wasn't secure. But it was alive. They embedded a barely noticeable signal, a kind of harmonic signature, inside every genuine Quietar handshake. Something organic, almost musical. Machines couldn't mimic it. It required an error, slight timing imperfections, human variation, the ghost of a real hand passing something delicate to another. They called it the hum, and they didn't explain it, didn't publish a guide. The users who noticed it felt it first, like a memory they couldn't quite name, a shiver behind the signal. It became a quiet test. If your network didn't hum, it wasn't real. Days passed. The fake forks persisted. But one by one, messages began to filter through. "I heard it. Is this the right one? My grandmother said it reminded her of a song she used to hum before sleep." And just like that, the system began to realign. Not by force, not by defense, but by memory, by resonance. Angela received a message from an old friend, someone who had once doubted the project. It read, "I thought this was just tech, but I see now, it's a memory of something we've never been allowed to keep." She read the message twice, then once more, and wept. Sundar didn't speak. He sat beside her and placed a hand over hers. "They won't stop," she whispered. "No," he said, "but now, neither will we." The next morning, reports came in from across the country. School libraries hosting Quietar seeds had been vandalized. A coalition of corporate-sponsored influencers launched a campaign branding the network a threat to innovation. Someone painted the words, "Noise belongs in the trash," across their lab's loading dock. But there was something in the wind, too. Small towns broadcasting again, elders in forgotten neighborhoods remembering how to speak across wires, children discovering a new kind of internet that whispered more than it shouted. And when Angela walked past the server bay that night, she didn't see a war being lost. She saw a choir being born. It was just after midnight when the old elevator groaned to life. No one expected a visitor. The lab's door buzzed gently, a tired blink of red turning green. Jorge rose from his desk, confused, half expecting a lost courier or a security officer making rounds. But it wasn't either. The woman who stepped through the door looked like she didn't belong in any system. Not anymore. Hair shaved close, eyes scanning every angle with soldier precision. She carried no device, no bag, just a black jacket soaked with rain and silence that walked before her. Angela froze. Sundar looked up from the node diagnostics, and his breath caught in his throat. "Auntie Nia?" he said. The name rippled through the room. For years, Naya had been a myth, Angela's estranged sister, a former systems engineer who had vanished after a whistleblower case gone wrong. The government denied involvement. The media never reported her name, but in their household, she was a legend. She hugged Angela without a word, then looked at Sundar, her voice low, almost shaking. "They're going to gut your network in the next 72 hours. I came to stop it." Silence followed, brittle and immediate. Mariam stepped forward cautiously. "How do you know this?" Naya pulled a flash drive from her jacket. "Because I wrote the kill switch, 8 years ago, before I walked away." Jorge cursed under his breath. Angela's face was pale. "Why would you?" "Because back then, I thought I was protecting something. I didn't understand that what I was defending wasn't people, it was power." She slid the drive into the offline terminal, and the screen illuminated with archived code buried deep in the infrastructure of the parent company that funded the Quietar forks. There it was, Project Athena, a shadow framework designed to monitor, mimic, and eventually override any decentralized system that gained significant public trust. "They're simulating your network on 6 superclusters," Nia said. "They're trying to train it to think like your users. Once it gets close enough, they'll switch traffic silently. Most people won't notice until it's too late." Angela leaned against the desk, gripping the edge as if the ground had just shifted. "What do we do?" Sundar had already begun scanning the code. "We need to change the shape of our network, make it unpredictable, force it to evolve in ways they can't track." Nia nodded. "That's why I came. I've been building something in the shadows, a counterstructure, not a firewall, a mirror. One that shows any system what it becomes when it forgets the people it's built to serve." "Can it work?" Jorge asked. "Only if we move now," Nia replied. "And only if your users are willing to become part of the system, not just connect to it." Angela raised her chin. "They're more than willing. They're waiting." That night, they worked in total darkness, lit only by backup lamps and the glow of code streaming across old monitors. Outside, the storm had returned, but it couldn't reach them. Not in that room. Not in that moment. What they were building wasn't just defense. It was memory made into structure. It was everything the world had thrown away, finally finding a shape. By dawn, the prototype of the mirror node was ready. Sundar tested it against the forked network and watched as the false signals stalled. Confused. Echoing back their intentions. Distorted. Nia smiled for the first time in years. "We don't fight them by being louder," she said. "We fight them by being impossible to ignore." And in that quiet, somewhere deep in the system, a hum returned. Not from the code, but from the people behind it. A sound of something real, something that could not be replaced. Dawn broke with no ceremony. Just a pale light leaking through dusty windows, brushing against the faces of people who had worked through the night. Cables curled like veins across the floor. Coffee cups sat forgotten, and the hum of the new mirror node filled the space with something fragile, like breath held too long. Sundar stood at the center of the room, watching the readouts cascade across the monitor. The prototype held up through the simulation. It had learned to bend, to reflect, to confuse the impersonators. But it wasn't enough. "They'll strike back within hours," Naya said, voice low but steady. "They're tracing you now. And when they find you, they won't use lawsuits. They'll use silence. They'll sever every line you've built." Angela moved beside her son, her eyes scanning the code she couldn't quite read, but whose meaning she could feel. "Then we make a decision," she said. "We decide what we're willing to lose to protect what matters." Jorge turned from the whiteboard where hours of calculations had turned to chaos. "What does that mean?" Sundar spoke, voice clear. "It means we need to go public." The room tensed. Mariam frowned. "You mean, reveal ourselves?" Sundar nodded. "No aliases, no quiet nodes, no shadows. We bring Quietar into the open. Let the people see not just the tech, but the hands that built it, the voices behind the code. If we stay hidden, we make it easier for them to rewrite the narrative. But if we speak, if we show the human face behind this, maybe the world listens. Silence followed, the kind that comes not from fear, but from realization. Nia was the first to break it. If you do this, you can't go back. They'll discredit you, dig into your families, try to break you. Angela reached for her son's shoulder. They've been breaking us in silence for generations. I'd rather be loud. That afternoon, in a corner of the lab with only one working camera, they recorded the message. It wasn't polished. No filters, no script. Just a circle of chairs, a cracked tablet showing the quietar pulse, and voices, one by one, speaking truth. Jorge spoke of his brother, deported after an IC system flagged him for a name match error. Mariam talked about her mother's clinic, silenced by a billing system that couldn't process undocumented patients. Angela shared her nights cleaning executive offices, never once being seen by the people whose lives she helped function. And then Sundar spoke, not as a prodigy, not as a savior, but as a child born into a system that had decided what he was before he had a chance to define himself. We don't want to destroy the future, he said. We just want to be part of it. They titled the video, The Ones You Never See, and uploaded it through Quietar's oldest node, the very first one Sundar ever built. Then they waited. For the strike, or the echo, or both. Within 2 hours, the video had been mirrored across 50 networks. Within 4 years, it had reached educators, librarians, out-of-work coders, farmers, night shift workers, and grandmothers who had kept radio diaries in their basements. Not viral. Resonant. It didn't spread because it shocked. It spread because it reminded people of something they had almost forgotten, that systems are supposed to serve, not erase. At 11:42 p.m., the first significant attack hit. Floods of false packets, identity spoofing, logic bombs buried inside clone directories. But this time, something was different. As the team braced, they noticed the mirror node wasn't just reflecting, it was answering. For every exploit, a patch emerged, not from the lab, but from users. Unknown contributors from around the world began submitting fixes, suggesting reroutes, adjusting signatures to keep the hum alive. Angela stared at the console, stunned. They're defending it, all of them. They've claimed it, said Nia. Now it's theirs to protect. Sundar watched the pulse stabilize. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The network was no longer an invention. It was a memory, multiplied, a voice that couldn't be silenced, because now it belonged to everyone. The next morning, the lab was unusually quiet. Not the hush of sleep or exhaustion, but something heavier, like the calm before the tide pulls back to reveal something long buried. Angela was rechecking patch notes when Sundar, standing by the window, froze. There's a man outside, he said. He's not with security. Jorge stood and peered through the blinds. No badge, no phone, just standing there. Nia walked up beside them, and the moment she saw him, her breath hitched. It's him, she whispered, the one who left me behind. Before anyone could speak, the door buzzed, a single chime. No urgency. Angela stepped forward and opened it. The man standing there looked nothing like the legends. No billionaire sheen, no corporate swagger, just an aging man in a long coat, eyes like winter, carrying a leather folder pressed flat against his chest. I'm looking for Sundar, he said quietly. And for Angela Moore. Everyone went still. Sundar stepped closer, protective instinct rising. Why? The man hesitated. Because I owe you both a truth I've avoided for 20 years. Angela narrowed her eyes. You're Richard Langston. He nodded. Yes. And I was once the person who walked away from a girl named Nia in a place called Red Hollow, Naya didn't flinch.
You didn't just walk away, she said. You watched them erase me. You let them. His voice cracked. I did. And I've spent every day since pretending that decision wasn't the beginning of my downfall. He turned to Sundar. But what you built, what all of you have built, it's the second chance I never earned. And I won't take another step until I know whether you want me here. Silence held its breath. Then Sundar spoke. You were part of what broke her, and people like you designed the systems that erased people like us. But if you came here to listen, not lead, then sit. Richard exhaled deeply, as if his body had been waiting for that permission longer than he realized. He walked inside and took the nearest chair. No speeches, no performance, just presence. Angela handed him a printout from the system logs. See this node? She said. This one pulsed from an orphaned subnet we can't trace. It's broadcasting something encrypted, but not in a hostile manner. Rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Richard squinted. That's not ours. Naya crossed her arms. No, it's hers. She tapped a key, and a fragment of code danced across the screen. Elegant, haunting, unmistakably written by the girl once known only as Cricket. She's watching again, Sundar said. She knows we're no longer hiding. The code wasn't malicious. It wasn't a threat. It was more like a question written in syntax. A challenge, or maybe a test. She wants to know what we'll do now that we have eyes on us, Angela said softly. Richard leaned forward. Then we answer her. That afternoon, the team drafted a response, not in code, but in action. They set up an open node tethered to the network, which is read-only and fully transparent, a place where anyone, not just engineers, could witness, comment, and suggest. It was messy, vulnerable, but it was real. They called it the mirror table. Let her see us, Nia said. Let everyone see us, and let them decide if we're still worth listening to. That evening, as the lab emptied for a few hours of needed rest, Sundar remained behind. He sat by the glowing console, eyes flicking through threads of code, watching as a new line pulsed gently from Cricket's node. Just 3 words. Still watching. Listening. He smiled. Just a little. Then I typed back, slowly and surely. Then we won't flinch. The message arrived without warning. No alerts, no fanfare. Just a subtle pulse on the mirror table node at 2:17 a.m., barely distinguishable from background noise. Angela noticed it first. A string of code, familiar in rhythm, but trembling with the weight of nothing, unfolded one line at a time. Meet me where the silence began. She didn't need coordinates. She had always known the place it referred to. Red Hollow, the orphanage that had swallowed her childhood, that erased girls like Nia, that whispered lies into official records and called it structure. Angela stared at the words on the screen, her face unreadable. Sundar stood just behind her, quiet, as if sensing the gravity in her stillness. She's asking us to come, he said gently. Nia stepped closer, her voice low but steady. She's not testing our code anymore. She's testing our character. Richard looked up from the log data, his face pale under the lab lights. Then we go, he said. Together. By sunrise, they were in a van heading west, the city's gleaming towers shrinking behind them as cracked roads led them into the shadow of memory. No security escort. No camera crew, just 5 people chasing a ghost in the direction of forgiveness. The drive was long and silent. Every bump in the road felt like a question. Would she welcome them? Would she destroy what they'd built? Or was she still listening? When the van pulled up to the edge of Red Hollow, the building loomed like a scar on the landscape. The gate had rusted open.
Power cables snaked out from a half-buried generator, but the old antenna blinked, alive. As they stepped into the compound, a single monitor buzzed to life. Grainy, flickering, but unmistakably authentic. Cricket's face filled the screen. Older, scarred, beautiful in the way only survival could carve. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes swept over them like a scan. And when she did speak, it wasn't with a smile. It was with a challenge. Now show me that you meant it.
No one moved. The only sound was the low hum of the server rack buried beneath Red Hollow's broken floorboards, still running, breathing after all these years. Cricket leaned toward the camera, her voice crackling through static. You built a system to replace trust. I tore it down to prove trust was never part of it. Angela stepped forward, her voice calm but unwavering. We came to face you, not to fix you. Cricket's expression didn't soften, but something behind her eyes shifted. Then why bring him? She asked, nodding toward Sundar. Because he deserves to know what silence sounds like before it becomes a weapon, Angela said. Richard finally spoke, the weight of his history pulling at every syllable. We buried you under someone else's ambition. I did. You were never supposed to fade. We just pretended you did so we wouldn't feel guilty. The monitor blinked, then crackled. And now, guilt brings you here? No, Naya said quietly. Hope does. Cricket turned away from the camera for a moment, and the screen showed the edge of the room she was in. Frayed circuit boards, a cot, notebooks filled with looping, spidery code. She'd been building something too, something no one had seen. When she turned back, her voice was quieter. What if I came back? Sundar answered before anyone else could. Then we learned together. A pause. A blink. The screen flickered. And then, a data stream activated. Coordinates. Source keys. A transfer of knowledge. And finally, one last line from Cricket. Let's build what no one believed we could. The screen went black. But something new had been set in motion. Not just code, not just systems, trust. Rewritten. The lab was quiet, but not still. Engineers moved with careful urgency, not racing to fix something broken, but laying the foundation for something new. At the center of the room, Sundar and Cricket stood shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by whiteboards scribbled with a blend of old scars and new visions. She had returned, not as a threat, but as a mirror, a mind once cast out now anchoring the future. Angela watched them from the mezzanine above, her mop now traded for a security badge. Her eyes tracked every movement, but not with worry, pride, steady and quiet, like the first light after a long storm. Richard entered, slower these days, the weight of redemption heavier than ambition had ever been. He carried a folder marked Project Echo and set it gently on the table. If we build this right, he said, we won't just protect the system. We'll rebuild how people trust each other inside it. Naya nodded. No more ghost protocols. No more ignoring the ones in the shadows. Cricket didn't speak. She simply tapped her keyboard. A live simulation came to life. Code self-healing, nodes adapting, trust becoming a network logic, not an afterthought. Sundar leaned in. It's listening to itself, he whispered. Like it knows it's alive. Angela smiled. Like it knows someone's finally listening. Outside the windows, dawn pushed its way through the clouds. Not the end. Not a perfect beginning. But something real. As the system pulsed with quiet intelligence, the team leaned in together, not as roles or ranks, but as witnesses, to what they had broken, to what they could build, to a world no longer deaf to silence. The auditorium was filled, not with investors or executives, but with students, janitors, engineers,
and every unseen worker who had ever walked past a closed door and wondered if they belonged behind it. On stage, there was no spotlight, just a simple table, a monitor, and a worn notebook with dog-eared pages filled in looping pencil scrawl. Sundar stepped forward, taller now, voice steady. Behind him, a projection displayed lines of code not just as instructions, but as stories. Every bracket and loop a breath taken in silence, now spoken aloud. "This system," he said, "isn't perfect, but it listens because we taught it to do so, because we listened first." In the front row, Angela watched through misty eyes. Her name was now etched on the lab's cornerstone, but her pride wasn't in recognition. It was in resilience. Beside her, Cricket sat with arms crossed, expression unreadable, but eyes that never stopped scanning. She hadn't agreed to stay. She didn't need to. Her code was now the spine of every trust protocol running through the grid. In her absence, she was present in everything. Richard stood in the back, unnoticed by most, which felt right. He had been seen long enough. Now it was their turn. As the applause rose, Sundar glanced down at his notebook, the one he used to hide beneath floor tiles and cracked tablet cases. He turned to the last page and wrote one final line. "Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means the world forgot how to listen." He closed the book. Outside, the city pulsed with light, but inside, for the first time, the system hummed in a frequency everyone could finally hear. Not dominance, not defense, but understanding. What if brilliance lived in the places we refuse to look? A child is cleaning offices before dawn, in a mother whose name isn't on the door, but whose strength built the very walls. This wasn't just a story about a system nearly collapsing. It was about how we've been taught to measure worth by visibility, and how dangerously wrong that is. Because the truth is, America's next great inventor may be folding linens. Its most excellent coder might not speak your language, and the person who saves your future might never have been invited into the room where decisions get made. But brilliance doesn't wait for permission. It grows in silence. And one day, that silence becomes thunder. What Sundar taught us wasn't just about security or code. He showed us what happens when someone finally says, "I see you," and means it. That slight shift, from dismissal to dignity, can change the fate of everything. So here's our challenge to you. Who are you overlooking? What systems do you trust just because they look polished? And what would change if you finally listened to the people you've been walking past every day? If this story reached something in you, shared pain, quiet hope, or a memory that still stings, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below with your thoughts. Share this with someone who grew up unheard. And if you want more stories that lift the veil and amplify the invisible, subscribe to our channel. Join a community where every whisper matters. Thank you for watching. See you in the following video.